The dust had barely settled on the wagon train when Delilah Hayes noticed the blood seeping through her younger brother's shirt, and she knew in that moment their journey west had just become infinitely more dangerous. It was August of 1874, and the small convoy of settlers had been attacked by bandits 3 miles outside Lincoln, Nebraska. The thieves had gotten away with most of their supplies, leaving 12 families stranded and desperate on the prairie with barely enough food to last a week. Delilah's brother Tommy, just 14 years old, had taken a bullet grazing his shoulder while trying to protect their mother's silver locket. Their parents had died of cholera 2 years prior, leaving Delilah at 21 to care for her younger siblings, Tommy and 8-year-old Sarah. The wagon master, a gruff man named Cyrus, gathered everyone together as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. "Lincoln's still a day's ride," he announced, his voice carrying over the frightened murmurs. "We'll make camp here tonight, ration what we have left, and push through tomorrow." Delilah pressed a cloth against Tommy's wound, relieved to see it was superficial. Sarah clung to her skirts, her face pale and streaked with dust. "I'm hungry, Dee," she whispered. "I know, sweetheart. We'll eat soon." But as the families gathered around the 3 remaining campfires that evening, Delilah watched the meager supplies being distributed. There were too many mouths and not enough food. When Mrs. Patterson began serving stew from a single pot, ladling careful portions into tin bowls, Delilah counted heads and calculated quickly. She had always been good with numbers, a skill her father had encouraged despite the raised eyebrows from neighbors who thought education wasted on girls. Tommy got his bowl first because of his injury, and Sarah received hers moments later. Delilah made sure both children started eating before she even thought of her own hunger. She stood back, watching as the other families received their portions, the pot growing visibly emptier with each serving. "Miss Hayes," Mrs. Patterson called, "come get yours." "I'm fine," Delilah said quickly. "I ate some hardtack earlier. Save it for the children." It was a lie. She had given her last piece of hardtack to Tommy that afternoon. But there were 3 children from the Morrison family who looked half-starved already, and she could not take food from their mouths. She did not notice the man watching her from across the fire, his gray eyes taking in every detail of the exchange. Miles Tucker had been hired as a scout 2 weeks into the wagon train's journey from St. Louis. At 25, he had spent the better part of 7 years roaming the frontier, working as a cowboy, a tracker, and occasionally as a hired gun when the work was honest. He wore his brown hair longer than was fashionable, and a scar ran from his left eyebrow to his temple, courtesy of a run-in with a mountain lion when he was 19. He had joined this particular train because he was heading to Lincoln anyway, where he had been offered a job as foreman on a cattle ranch outside town. Miles had watched Delilah Hayes since the attack. She had been the first to start organizing the wounded, ripping strips from her own petticoats for bandages without a moment's hesitation. She had a calm way about her that steadied people, even as her own hands shook slightly when she thought no one was looking. Now, as he watched her turn away from the food, claiming she had already eaten when he knew damn well she had not, something shifted in his chest. He had seen her give her portion away 3 times in the past week. She always ate last, if at all, making sure her siblings and often other children were fed first. Miles stood up from where he had been sitting, his own bowl still half full of stew. He walked over to where Delilah had retreated to sit on a wagon tongue, away from the firelight. "You should eat," he said without preamble. Delilah looked up, startled. She recognized the scout, of course. Everyone on the train knew Miles Tucker. He was quiet, competent, and had twice saved them from taking wrong trails that would have added days to their journey. but she had never spoken directly to him. "I'm quite all right, Mr. Tucker." "You're not." He held out his bowl. "Take this." "I could not possibly." "You can and you will." His voice was firm but not unkind. "You have not eaten a proper meal in days, Miss Hayes. I have been watching." Color rose to her cheeks. "Then you have been wasting your attention, sir. I am managing perfectly well. Your brother and sister need you healthy. You are no good to them if you collapse from hunger." It was a practical argument, and Delilah found she had no good counter to it. Her stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, betraying her. Miles' expression did not change, but he pushed the bowl more insistently toward her. "Please," he said, and the single word held a weight she had not expected. Delilah took the bowl with trembling fingers. The stew was still warm, and the smell made her dizzy with longing. "What about you?" "I had plenty, and I know how to find food on the trail. Tomorrow I will catch us something fresh." She wanted to argue further, but the kindness in his weathered face disarmed her. "Thank you," she whispered. Miles nodded and walked back to his post, but he glanced back once to make sure she was eating. She was, taking small, careful bites as though afraid the food might disappear if she moved too quickly. From that night forward, Miles Tucker made it his personal mission to ensure Delilah Hayes ate properly. When they reached Lincoln the next day, exhausted and relieved, the wagon train dispersed. Most families had relatives or contacts in town, but Delilah found herself standing in the main street with her siblings and their few remaining possessions, uncertain where to go. Lincoln was a growing town, bustling with activity. The Burlington and Missouri River Railroad had reached the city just a few years prior, and new buildings seemed to be going up every week. The streets were a mix of established businesses and fresh lumber, the scent of sawdust mixing with horse manure and the ever-present prairie wind. Miles had planned to ride straight to the ranch outside town, but instead he found himself approaching the Hayes siblings. "You have lodgings arranged?" he asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Delilah lifted her chin, trying to maintain dignity even as worry creased her forehead. "We will find something suitable. The boarding houses will be full. There has been an influx of settlers this summer." He paused, making a decision that surprised even himself. "Come with me. I know someone who can help." "Mr. Tucker, we cannot impose. It is not an imposition." Martha Green runs a respectable establishment on the edge of town. She always has room for families in need, and she will give you fair rates. Delilah hesitated, but Sarah was swaying on her feet with exhaustion, and Tommy's shoulder needed proper medical attention. "We would be very grateful," she finally said. Martha Green turned out to be a widow in her 50s with iron-gray hair and shrewd but kind eyes. She took one look at the ragged siblings and quoted a price Delilah knew was well below the going rate. Miles helped carry their belongings to a small but clean room on the second floor, then excused himself to speak with Martha in the kitchen. "They have no money, do they?" Martha asked bluntly when they were alone. "Not much, I would wager. The father was a schoolteacher back east. He died, and the girl has been keeping those children alive through sheer determination." Martha studied him with interest. "You have taken a shine to her." "I have taken an interest in making sure they do not starve," Miles corrected, though his ears reddened slightly. "Can you help her find work?" "I could use help in the kitchen and with the cleaning." "But Miles, that girl looks educated. She might find better work than scrubbing floors." "Then help her find it. In the meantime, I will cover the difference in their board." Martha's eyebrows rose. "That is generous of you." "Just do not tell her. She has too much pride to accept charity." He pulled out a roll of bills and counted out several, pressing them into Martha's hand. "And make sure she eats regular meals. She has a habit of giving her portions to her siblings." After Miles left, Martha stood in her kitchen for a long moment, a small smile playing on her lips. She had known the cowboy for 3 years, since he had first started working in the area, and she had never seen him take such interest in anyone. This would be interesting to watch indeed. Delilah came downstairs an hour later after settling her siblings for much-needed rest. She found Martha in the kitchen, preparing the evening meal. "Mrs. Green, I wanted to discuss payment. I have a small amount saved, but I will need to find work immediately. Sit down, child." Martha gestured to a chair at the large wooden table. "Let me make you some tea and we will talk." "I do not need. You have been taking care of everyone else. Let someone take care of you for a moment." Martha's tone brooked no argument. She poured hot tea from a kettle and set a plate of fresh bread and butter in front of Delilah. "Now eat while we talk." Delilah found herself obeying, too tired to protest further. The bread was soft and still warm, better than anything she had tasted in weeks. "You have education," Martha stated. "I can hear it in the way you speak." "My father was a schoolteacher. He taught all of us." Delilah's voice softened. "He believed learning was the key to a better life. He was right. Lincoln needs teachers. The school here is growing, and they are always looking for someone qualified, especially women who can teach the younger children." Hope flickered in Delilah's chest. "Do you truly think they might hire me?" "I think you should present yourself to Mr. Hendricks, the school superintendent, first thing Monday morning. In the meantime, you can help me here if you are willing. I will reduce your board in exchange for assistance with cooking and cleaning." It was more kindness than Delilah had expected to find in a strange town. Her eyes stung with grateful tears. "Thank you, Mrs. Green. You are very generous. I have been where you are, child. When I first came west with my husband, we had nothing but hope and determination. People helped us, and now I help others when I can." Martha patted her hand. "Besides, Miles Tucker spoke well of you, and he is a good judge of character." "Mr. Tucker has been unexpectedly kind," Delilah admitted. "I do not understand why he has taken such interest in our welfare." Martha smiled knowingly but said only, "He is a good man. You will find there are still such men in this world, even in rough country." That Sunday, Delilah kept her siblings close and attended church services in Lincoln's modest but well-built Methodist church. The Reverend was a young man named Samuel Porter, earnest and energetic in his preaching. Afterward, several townspeople introduced themselves, welcoming the newcomers with a friendliness that eased some of Delilah's anxiety about starting over in an unfamiliar place. She did not see Miles Tucker at the service, and told herself she had no reason to feel disappointed. He had been kind to her family, but he was a cowboy with his own life and work. She could not expect him to continue involving himself in their affairs. Monday morning, Delilah put on her best dress, a simple blue cotton that was nevertheless clean and well-mended, and made her way to the schoolhouse. Mr. Hendricks, a balding man of about 50 with spectacles perched on his nose, listened to her qualifications with growing interest. "You can teach mathematics?" he asked, sounding surprised. "Yes, sir. My father believed strongly that girls should learn figures as well as boys. I can also teach reading, writing, geography, and history. I have some knowledge of natural sciences as well." Mr. Hendricks leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Miss Hayes, I will be frank with you. We have been desperately in need of another teacher since Mrs. Wilson left to have her baby 3 months ago. However, you are quite young, and some parents might have concerns about your ability to manage a classroom." Delilah kept her voice steady. "I have been managing my family's affairs for 2 years, sir, including the education of my younger siblings. I am more capable than my age might suggest." "Can you start on Wednesday? That will give you a day to prepare lessons and familiarize yourself with our curriculum." Relief flooded through her so strongly she felt dizzy. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." The pay he quoted was modest but fair, enough to cover their boarding fees and basic necessities with a small amount left over. For the first time since leaving Missouri, Delilah felt as though they might actually build a life here. She was walking back to the boarding house, her step light despite the August heat, when she nearly collided with a solid chest. Strong hands steadied her, and she looked up into the gray eyes of Miles Tucker. "Mr. Tucker, forgive me, I was not watching where I was going. No harm done." He released her arms but did not step back immediately. "You look happy. I take it your meeting went well." "I have been hired as a teacher at the school. I start Wednesday." She could not keep the joy from her voice. "Mrs. Green was right about there being opportunities here." "That is fine news." Miles smiled, a genuine expression that softened the hard lines of his face and made him suddenly handsome. "You deserve some good fortune, Miss Hayes. We have had considerable good fortune since arriving in Lincoln, much of it directly due to your kindness." Delilah met his eyes. "I have not properly thanked you for all you have done." "No thanks needed." He shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "I was actually on my way to see Martha. I wanted to make sure you all were settling in all right. We are, thanks to you and Mrs. Green." Delilah hesitated, then added, "Would you join us for supper tonight? It is the least we can do to show our gratitude." Miles should have declined. He had work waiting at the ranch, and he had already involved himself more deeply in this family's affairs than was wise. But looking at Delilah Hayes, with the Nebraska sun catching golden highlights in her brown hair and genuine warmth in her hazel eyes, he found himself saying, "I would be honored." That evening, Martha set her dining table with care, and Delilah helped prepare a meal of fried chicken, potatoes, green beans, and fresh biscuits. It was a feast compared to their trail rations, and Sarah chattered excitedly through the preparations, while Tommy, his shoulder bandaged but healing well, tried to maintain the dignity befitting his role as the man of the family. When Miles arrived promptly at 6, he had cleaned up and changed into fresh clothes. He brought a small bag of peppermint sticks for the children, who accepted them with shy delight. "Mr. Tucker, you spoil them," Delilah said, but she was smiling. "Children should have sweets now and then. Life is hard enough." They gathered around Martha's table, and as the food was passed, Miles noticed Delilah immediately serving Sarah and Tommy before reaching for anything herself. It was instinctive, so deeply ingrained she probably did not even realize she was doing it. He reached across and filled Delilah's plate before she could serve herself the smallest portions. "You first," he said firmly. "Then the children." Delilah blinked in surprise. "I can serve myself, Mr. Tucker." "I know you can, but you will serve yourself last and take half what you need." He met her eyes. "From now on, your plate gets filled first. Doctor's orders." "You are not a doctor," she protested, but color had risen to her cheeks. "No, but I have seen enough people go hungry to recognize the signs. You have been putting everyone else first for too long, Miss Hayes. Someone needs to look after you." Martha hid a smile behind her napkin, and even Tommy looked between his sister and the cowboy with new interest. "I am perfectly capable of looking after myself," Delilah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then prove it by eating a proper meal." Miles' tone was gentle but implacable. "Please." There was that word again, weighted with concern and something else she could not quite name. Delilah looked down at her well-filled plate and felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. When had anyone last worried about whether she ate enough? When had anyone taken care of her instead of the other way around? "Thank you," she whispered. The meal passed pleasantly, with conversation flowing more easily than Delilah had expected. Miles told stories about his years working cattle drives, carefully editing out the more dangerous or gruesome details for the children's sake. He had a dry sense of humor that emerged gradually, catching her off guard and making her laugh in a way she had almost forgotten she could. Tommy peppered him with questions about ranch work and horses, his boyish enthusiasm breaking through the solemn demeanor he had tried to maintain. Sarah asked if Miles had ever seen a buffalo, and he promised to take them all to see the small herd that sometimes grazed on the ranch property. After supper, Miles helped clear the table despite Martha's protests that guests should not work. "I am a working man, Martha. I am not used to sitting idle while others clean up." Delilah found herself washing dishes alongside him, their hands occasionally brushing in the soapy water. Each touch sent an odd flutter through her stomach, a sensation both alarming and not entirely unpleasant. "You are good with Tommy and Sarah," she said as they worked. "They have not been so light-hearted in a long time. They are good children. You have done well by them." "I have only done what was necessary." Delilah scrubbed at a stubborn spot on a plate. "Some days I feel I am failing them entirely." "You are not." Miles' voice was firm. "You got them across half the country alive and relatively healthy. You found them a safe place to live and secured yourself honest work. That is not failure, Miss Hayes. That is something to be proud of." Delilah stopped scrubbing, her vision blurring with sudden tears. She had held herself together through so much, but simple kindness threatened to undo her completely. "I miss my parents so much," she admitted in a whisper. "I miss having someone to lean on. I am so tired of being strong all the time." Miles set down the dish he had been drying and turned to face her fully. "Then lean on someone. Lean on Martha. Lean on me. You do not have to carry everything alone." "I barely know you, Mr. Tucker." "Then get to know me. I am not going anywhere." He paused, then added with careful honesty, "And I find I very much want to know you better, Miss Hayes." Her breath caught. There was no mistaking the meaning in his words or the warmth in his eyes. "Why?" she asked. "Why have you been so kind to us? You barely know us." Miles considered the question seriously. "I saw you give your food away on the trail. I saw you tend the wounded before seeing to your own needs. I saw you comfort your sister when you were just as frightened as she was." He held her gaze. "I saw someone worth knowing, worth helping. And the more I learn about you, the more I want to keep seeing." No man had ever spoken to her this way. The young men back in Missouri had been awkward boys, tongue-tied or overly bold. Miles Tucker was a man, scarred and weathered by hard living, but with an honesty and directness she found deeply appealing. "I would like to know you better as well," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Miles smiled, slow and genuine. "Then perhaps I could call on you properly, Miss Hayes, court you the right way." "I think I would like that very much, Mr. Tucker." "Miles," he corrected gently. "Call me Miles." "Then you must call me Delilah, Delilah." He said her name like it was something precious, and she felt warmth spread through her chest. "It suits you." From that evening forward, Miles became a regular presence in their lives. He would stop by the boarding house several times a week, always with some excuse. He brought Tommy a book about horses he thought the boy might like. He helped repair a broken wheel on Martha's wagon. He invited them all to the ranch on a Sunday afternoon and made good on his promise to show them the buffalo herd grazing in the distance. Delilah began teaching at the school and found she loved the work. Her students ranged from 6 to 14, a mixed group of farmers' children, shopkeepers' offspring, and the sons and daughters of railroad workers. She was firm but fair, and within weeks had earned both their respect and affection. Miles made a point of meeting her after school when he was in town. walking her back to the boarding house. They talked about everything and nothing, discovering shared opinions on some topics and friendly disagreements on others. He told her about growing up in Texas, the youngest of 5 sons on a struggling ranch. She told him about her father's dreams of moving west to start a school where education would be available to all children, regardless of their family's means. "He would be proud of you," Miles said one afternoon in late September as they walked through Lincoln's growing downtown. The air had turned cooler, a hint of the coming autumn in the breeze. "You are living his dream." "I hope so." Delilah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Some days I wonder if I should have stayed in Missouri, tried to make things work there. Do you regret coming west?" She looked at him, at the strong line of his jaw and the way his gray eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "No," she said softly. "I do not regret it at all." Miles stopped walking and turned to face her. They were standing near the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Delilah, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to beat faster. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you." The words were simple, direct, utterly honest. "I have been falling since the moment I saw you give away your food to make sure others were fed. Every day since, I have fallen a little more." Delilah could not breathe. No one had ever said such words to her, and the intensity of feeling in Miles' face made her tremble. "Miles, you do not have to say anything back. I just needed you to know. I needed you to understand that my intentions are serious. When I court you, when I spend time with you and your family, it is because I am hoping for a future together. If that is not what you want, tell me now and I will step back. I will not press where I am not wanted." "You are wanted," she said quickly, urgently. "Miles, you are very much wanted." She reached out and took his hand, a bold gesture that would have scandalized some, but they were alone on the prairie road, and she needed him to understand. "I am falling in love with you too. It terrifies me because I have so much responsibility, so many people depending on me. But when I am with you, I feel less alone. I feel like perhaps I could have something for myself and not just duty." Miles raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "You can have both. We will take care of your siblings together. They will be ours, not just yours. You would take on that burden. It is not a burden. It is a family." He smiled at her. "Besides, Tommy is going to make a fine ranch hand in a few years, and Sarah is already wrapping everyone around her little finger. They are good children, Delilah. I would be proud to help raise them." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but they were good tears, healing tears. "How did I get so lucky as to meet you? I ask myself the same question every day." Miles wiped her tears away with his thumb. "I think perhaps we were both lucky." As autumn progressed into winter, their courtship deepened. Miles taught Tommy to ride properly, spending patient hours helping the boy overcome his initial nervousness around the large animals. He brought Sarah a kitten from a barn litter, a tiny orange tabby she named Butterscotch. And he made sure, at every meal they shared, that Delilah's plate was filled first and generously. It became a running, tender joke between them. Delilah would reach to serve others, and Miles would gently redirect her, filling her plate before anyone else's. "You first," he would say, and she would smile even as she protested. "I am not an invalid, Miles. I can serve myself." "I know, but you will not properly, so I will do it for you." Martha watched their romance bloom with satisfaction, occasionally remarking to her other boarders that she had never seen two people more suited to each other. The town watched too, with the friendly interest small communities took in budding relationships. Delilah Hayes and Miles Tucker became an accepted pair, invited to social gatherings together, greeted as a unit when they walked down the street. In December, Miles took Delilah to the Christmas social at the church. She wore a new dress she had saved up for, a deep green wool that brought out the color of her eyes. Miles had never seen her look more beautiful, and he told her so, making her blush with pleasure. They danced together, Miles holding her with a respectful but possessive care that made her feel cherished. When they stepped outside for a moment of cool air, away from the crowded building, Miles pulled a small box from his pocket. "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment," he admitted. "But I realize there is no perfect time, just the time you choose to take action." Delilah's hand shook as she accepted the box. Inside was a ring, simple but lovely, with a small garnet set in silver. "Miles, marry me, Delilah, be my wife. Let me spend the rest of my life making sure you are cared for and loved. Let me help you raise Tommy and Sarah. Let me be your partner in all things." He took the ring from the box and held it ready. "I love you more than I thought it possible to love another person. Say yes." "Yes," she said immediately without hesitation. "Yes, Miles, I will marry you." He slid the ring onto her finger and then he kissed her for the first time, a gentle but thorough kiss that promised years of love and devotion. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and smiling. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too, so very much." They were married in February of 1875, in the same Methodist church where they had first begun building their life in Lincoln. Delilah wore a simple white dress, and Miles wore his best suit. Tommy stood up as his best man, bursting with pride at the honor. Sarah was the flower girl, scattering rose petals with solemn concentration. Martha cried happy tears, and half the town turned out to witness the union. Reverend Porter pronounced them husband and wife, and when Miles kissed his bride, there was a collective sigh of satisfaction from the congregation. They moved into a small house on the ranch property, a sturdy 2-bedroom structure that Miles and several ranch hands had spent the winter making ready. It was modest but well built, with a kitchen that got good morning light and a porch that looked out over the rolling prairie. Delilah continued teaching, and Miles worked as foreman, managing the ranch's growing herd of cattle. Tommy thrived in the ranch environment, learning the skills that would eventually make him an excellent cattleman himself. Sarah attended school, where her sister taught her with patient attention. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Money was sometimes tight, especially after a harsh winter killed several head of cattle. There were disagreements, as any couple has, usually stemming from Delilah's stubborn independence clashing with Miles' protective instincts. But they learned to communicate, to compromise, to remember that they were a team working toward the same goals. And through it all, Miles never forgot his promise. At every meal, whether at home or at Martha's boarding house or at church socials, he made sure Delilah's plate was filled first. It was his way of showing her every single day that she mattered, that she deserved to be cared for, that she came first in his heart. "You are going to spoil me," she would say, but she always smiled when she said it. "That is the plan," he would reply, kissing her forehead. In the spring of 1876, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and trepidation. They had not planned for a child so soon, but the idea of creating a life together, a family that was theirs from the beginning, felt like a beautiful gift. Miles became even more protective if that was possible. He insisted she reduce her teaching hours, worried about her standing all day. He made sure she ate nutritious meals, always serving her first and largest portions. He rubbed her feet when they swelled and held her hair when morning sickness struck. "I am not made of glass," Delilah protested one evening as he fussed over her. "I know. You are the strongest person I have ever met, but even strong people need taking care of." He placed his hand on her growing belly. "You are growing, our child. Let me pamper you a little." She softened, as she always did when he spoke with such tenderness. "You are impossible to argue with." "Good. Then stop trying and let me love you properly." Their son was born in December of 1876, during a snowstorm that blanketed the prairie in white. Miles paced the kitchen while Martha and the midwife attended Delilah in the bedroom. Tommy tried to distract him with conversation, and Sarah dozed in a chair, periodically waking to ask if the baby had arrived yet. When the baby's cry finally pierced the air, Miles nearly knocked over a chair in his haste to reach Delilah. She was exhausted, her hair damp with sweat, but she held their son with fierce love. "A boy," she said softly. "We have a son, Miles." He knelt beside the bed, looking at the tiny red face of his firstborn. "He is perfect. You are perfect." He kissed her gently. "Thank you." They named him Matthew Thomas Tucker, honoring both their families. Matthew for Miles' father, Thomas for Delilah's. Young Tommy was thrilled to have a nephew sharing his name, and Sarah was enchanted with the baby, constantly wanting to hold him. As Matthew grew, the Tucker household grew more lively. Miles had been right. They were a family, not just two people plus Delilah's siblings. Tommy began courting a nice girl from town, the daughter of the general store owner. Sarah excelled in school and talked about becoming a teacher like her sister. In 1878, Delilah gave birth to a daughter they named Dorothy. In 1880, another son arrived whom they called Michael. The house that had seemed so spacious became comfortably full of noise and love. Miles expanded his role at the ranch, eventually becoming a partner when the owner decided to retire. The steady income allowed them to build a larger house, still on the ranch property but with enough room for their growing family. Delilah reduced her teaching to part-time, but she never gave it up entirely, still passionate about education and the opportunities it provided. Tommy married his sweetheart in 1881 and started his own small ranch with Miles' help. Sarah, at 18, fell in love with a young lawyer who had recently opened a practice in Lincoln. They married in 1883, and Sarah divided her time between teaching and helping her husband build his career. Through all of it, through the joys and sorrows, the successes and setbacks, Miles Tucker never once forgot to serve his wife first at meals. It had become such an ingrained habit that he did it unconsciously, but the meaning behind it never diminished. One evening in 1885, when Matthew was 8, Dorothy was 7, and Michael was 5, they sat down to dinner as a family. Miles automatically filled Delilah's plate first, adding extra portions of her favorite dishes. Dorothy noticed and asked, "Papa, why do you always give Mama her food first?" Miles looked at his daughter, then at his wife, seeing the same beautiful woman he had fallen in love with 11 years earlier, though now there were faint lines around her eyes from laughter and sun. "Because your mama spent a long time making sure everyone else ate before she did. When I met her, she would give away her own food to make sure others had enough. So I decided that from then on, I would make sure she never had to wait, that she would always know she was important and cared for." "That is very romantic, Papa," Dorothy said with the solemnity only a 7-year-old could muster. "Your father is a very romantic man," Delilah said, smiling at her husband, "even when he pretends to be all practical and tough." "I have to maintain my reputation as a hardened cowboy," Miles protested, but he was grinning. "You are the softest cowboy in Nebraska," Matthew announced. "You let me name the new calf Buttercup." That was a moment of weakness. The family laughed together, the sound filling their home with warmth. After dinner, When the children had been sent to complete their evening chores and then to bed, Miles and Delilah stood on their porch, looking out at the star-filled prairie sky. "You ever think about that wagon train?" Delilah asked, leaning against her husband's solid warmth. "About how different our lives might have been if we had never met, sometimes. But mostly I am just grateful we did meet." Miles wrapped his arms around her. "You gave me something I did not know I was missing. A home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving day to day. You gave me the same. When my parents died, I thought I would spend my whole life just trying to keep us all afloat, never really living for myself. But you made space for me to be more than just a caretaker. You let me be a woman, a wife, a person with dreams and needs. You always were all those things. I just made sure you remembered." She turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Miles Tucker. More today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today." "That is my line," he said, then kissed her with the same passion and tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythm of ranch life. Their children grew into adults who made them proud. Matthew became a skilled rancher, eventually taking over more of the operation as Miles grew older. Dorothy married a doctor and moved to Omaha but visited frequently with her own children. Michael, the youngest, surprised everyone by developing a talent for business and opening a successful freight company that served the growing railroad network. Tommy and his wife had 4 children who often spent summers at the Tucker Ranch. Sarah and her lawyer husband had 3 daughters who were all academically inclined like their aunt. The family grew and expanded, a network of love and support that had begun with one cowboy noticing one woman's self-sacrifice. In 1895, Miles and Delilah celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a gathering that brought together what seemed like half of Lincoln. They had survived droughts and blizzards, economic panics and personal losses. Miles' hair had gone silver, and Delilah wore spectacles for reading now. But the love between them had only deepened, aged like fine wine into something richer and more complex. As they stood together in their parlor, surrounded by family and friends, their grandchildren playing underfoot, Delilah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. It had started with hunger and fear, with a young woman trying desperately to keep her family alive. It had been transformed by the observation and kindness of a man who saw her worth when she had almost forgotten it herself. "What are you thinking about?" Miles asked, pulling her close as the party swirled around them. "I am thinking about how lucky I am, how blessed we are. We made our own luck," he said, "by choosing each other every day. You chose me first," she reminded him, "and I have never regretted it for a moment. Best decision I ever made." Their children had organized the anniversary party as a surprise, complete with a meal prepared by Martha Green, who was now in her 70s, but still spry and sharp-tongued. As everyone gathered for the feast, Miles reached for Delilah's plate out of habit, filling it first before anyone else's. "After 20 years, you still do that," Martha observed with a fond smile. "After 20 years, she still tries to serve everyone else first if I do not," Miles countered. "Some habits do not change. Nor should they," Delilah said, squeezing his hand. "It reminds me every day that I am loved." The party lasted well into the evening, filled with stories and laughter, music and dancing. When the guests finally departed and the house grew quiet, Miles and Delilah stood on their porch one more time, looking out at the land they had built their life on. "You remember what you said to me, that night on the wagon train?" Miles asked. "When I first gave you my food." "I said thank you," Delilah replied. "You said you were managing perfectly well. You were so stubborn, so determined not to need help. I was terrified of being weak, of failing Tommy and Sarah. You could never be weak, but I am glad you learned it is all right to accept help. To let people care for you. You taught me that. You taught me that accepting love and care does not make me less strong, it makes me human. She looked up at him. Thank you for being patient with me, for seeing past my defenses. Thank you for letting me in. For trusting me with your heart and your family. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, the same landscape they had crossed all those years ago as strangers on a wagon train. But they had transformed that harsh, unforgiving land into a home filled with love and purpose. As they grew older, they slowed down but never stopped caring for each other. Miles eventually handed over most of the ranch operations to Matthew, though he still rode out to check the herds when his joints allowed it. Delilah retired from teaching in 1900, after 25 years of shaping young minds. She wrote a memoir about their journey west, which was published in a small regional press and became locally popular. They became the elder statesmen of their community, the couple everyone pointed to as an example of enduring love. Young people sought their advice on courtship and marriage. They sponsored several orphan children through school, remembering their own struggles. They donated to the church and the library, supporting the institutions that had supported them. In 1905, Martha Green passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 86. Miles and Delilah mourned the woman who had been instrumental in bringing them together and supporting their early years. They ensured she was buried with honor and established a scholarship in her name for young women pursuing education. The 20th century brought changes to Nebraska and the nation. The wild frontier they had known was increasingly tamed. Automobiles began appearing on Lincoln streets. Electricity came to town, though it would be years before it reached the ranch. The world was transforming, but some things remained constant. Miles still served Delilah first at every meal. His hands shook now with age, and sometimes he spilled a little, but the gesture remained the same. Delilah still thanked him every time, still smiled at the simple act of care it represented. In 1910, as they celebrated their 35th anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, Matthew made a toast. To my parents, who showed all of us what real love looks like, not the easy romantic gestures, but the daily choice to put each other first, the consistent, persistent care that lasts a lifetime. Hear, hear, echoed around the room, glasses raised in tribute. Later that night, preparing for bed, Delilah sat at her vanity, brushing her white hair. Miles came up behind her and took the brush gently, continuing the strokes as he had done countless times over the years. "I was thinking today," Delilah said, watching him in the mirror, "about that girl on the wagon train, so scared and alone. If I could go back and tell her what her life would become, I do not think she would believe me." "What would you tell her?" Miles asked, his hands gentle in her hair. "That she would find love beyond anything she imagined. That she would build a family that would span generations. That one act of kindness from a cowboy with gray eyes would change the trajectory of her entire existence." She turned to face him. "That she would be happy, truly, deeply happy." Miles set down the brush and cupped her face in his weathered hands. "I would tell the lonely cowboy who thought he would spend his life drifting from job to job that he was about to meet his purpose. That a brave, stubborn woman would teach him what it meant to truly live, not just survive. That he would know a richness of life he had never dreamed possible." They kissed, their movements slower now but no less loving than they had been 40 years earlier. They climbed into bed together, as they had done for thousands of nights, fitting together with the ease of long practice. "Miles," Delilah said into the darkness. "Yes, my love. Thank you for noticing I ate last. Thank you for caring. Thank you for letting me love you, for giving me the privilege of spending my life with you." They fell asleep holding hands, as they always did, two souls so intertwined that it was impossible to say where one ended and the other began. The years continued their steady march. In 1915, they celebrated 40 years of marriage. Miles was 76 now, Delilah 72. Their bodies were slower, their faces deeply lined, but their love had lost none of its vitality. Miles' memory began to fade slightly, names eluding him, recent events slipping away. But he never forgot Delilah, never forgot their children and grandchildren. And he never forgot to serve his wife first at meals, even when he could not remember what day it was. Delilah's arthritis made teaching impossible, but she read voraciously, keeping up with the world's changes. She wrote letters to her numerous descendants, offering advice and encouragement. She tended a garden in the warmer months, coaxing vegetables and flowers from the prairie soil. They spent their days in gentle routine. Breakfast together, watching the sun rise. Miles would read the newspaper aloud while Delilah sewed or knitted. Lunch, often with visiting family members. Afternoons on the porch, watching the world go by. Dinner, always with Miles serving Delilah first. Evenings by the fire in winter, on the porch in summer. It was a quiet life, but it was theirs, and they cherished every moment. In the spring of 1918, Miles fell ill with pneumonia. At 89, his body did not have the strength to fight as it once had. The doctor was honest. Miles' time was limited. The family gathered, filling the house with their presence and their love. Delilah stayed by his bedside constantly, holding his hand, talking to him even when he was too weak to respond. She told him stories of their life together, reminding him of moments both momentous and mundane. She thanked him for 43 years of steadfast love and devotion. On a warm May afternoon, with Delilah holding his hand and their children surrounding the bed, Miles Tucker took his last breath. He went peacefully, a slight smile on his face, his gaze fixed on his beloved wife until the very end. Delilah was devastated, as anyone would be after losing their partner of 4 decades. But she was not broken. Miles had spent their entire marriage building her up, making sure she knew her own strength and worth. She mourned deeply, but she endured. She lived for another 7 years, moving into town to be closer to her children, but maintaining her independence. She saw the end of the Great War, the beginning of the Roaring Twenties, the advent of radio and moving pictures. The world continued to change at a dizzying pace. But Delilah Tucker, born Delilah Hayes in 1843, carried with her the values and lessons of an earlier era. She remained generous, putting others' needs before her own. She remained strong, supporting her family through challenges. And she remained grateful for the gift Miles had given her all those years ago. The knowledge that she deserved to be cared for, that her needs mattered, that she was worthy of love. When Delilah passed away peacefully in her sleep in November of 1925, at the age of 82, she was surrounded by photographs of her sprawling family. 3 children, 12 grandchildren, 21 great-grandchildren, and 3 great-great-grandchildren. A legacy of love that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a wagon train in 1874. At her funeral, Matthew told the story his parents had told him many times, about how his father had noticed his mother always ate last, always gave her portion away to make sure others were fed. About how Miles had decided from that moment forward that Delilah would always be served first. About how that simple, consistent gesture had been a declaration of love more powerful than any words. "My father saw my mother's heart before anyone else did," Matthew said, his voice thick with emotion. "He saw her selflessness and her strength, and he made it his life's mission to make sure she never felt alone again. That is what real love looks like. Not grand gestures, but daily choices. Not proclamations, but actions. My father loved my mother by filling her plate first every day for 43 years. And in doing so, he filled all our lives with an example of what devotion truly means." The church was packed with people whose lives had been touched by Miles and Delilah Tucker. Former students Delilah had taught, now middle-aged with children of their own. Ranch hands Miles had mentored, now successful in their own right. Neighbors they had helped through hard times. Friends they had supported through joy and sorrow. They were buried side by side in Lincoln Cemetery, under a simple headstone that read, "Miles Tucker, 1829–1918, Delilah Hayes Tucker, 1843–1925, beloved partners in life and love together forever." Their story became family legend, passed down through generations. Great-grandchildren who never knew them personally still heard about the cowboy, who made sure his wife ate first. The simple act became a symbol of enduring love, a reminder that the greatest romances are built on daily kindnesses, consistent care, and the choice to put your partner's needs alongside your own. The ranch remained in the family, managed by Matthew's descendants. The house where Miles and Delilah raised their children stood for decades, carefully maintained as a tribute to the couple who had built it. Eventually, in the 1970s, it was moved to a historical site where it was preserved as an example of late 19th century ranch architecture. But more than that, it stood as a monument to a love story that had begun on a dusty wagon train and endured through every challenge the frontier could offer. Young couples touring the site would hear the story of Miles and Delilah, and many left inspired to bring more thoughtfulness into their own relationships. The tale of the cowboy who noticed his lady ate last and decided to change that small injustice became a touchstone for discussions about care and consideration in partnerships. In Lincoln, the scholarship fund Delilah had established in Martha Greene's name continued to help young women pursue education. The school where Delilah had taught for 25 years named a building in her honor. The ranch Miles had helped build into one of the most successful operations in the region still bore the Tucker name. But perhaps their greatest legacy was not in buildings or businesses, or even the numerous descendants who carried their blood. Their greatest legacy was the example they set of what love could be when nurtured with patience, expressed through action, and sustained through commitment. They had met as strangers on a difficult journey, two people scarred by loss and uncertainty. They had chosen each other against the harsh backdrop of the American frontier, building a life from almost nothing. And they had created something beautiful, something lasting, something that resonated through the generations that followed. The cowboy had noticed the lady ate last. And in deciding to change that, in making the simple but profound choice to ensure she was cared for, he had started something much greater than either of them could have imagined. He had started a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of seeing another person's need and choosing to meet it. Their story lived on in the countless meals shared by their descendants, in the way parents taught their children to think of others, in the marriages that valued partnership and mutual care. It lived on in every act of kindness, every moment of putting someone else's needs first, every choice to love actively rather than passively. Miles and Delilah Tucker had walked into legend, two ordinary people who became extraordinary through their devotion to each other. They had started with hunger on the prairie and ended with a love that fed generations. And though they were gone, their story remained, a bright thread woven into the fabric of their family and their community, a reminder that the smallest acts of care can change everything. In the end, it was not the hardships they had endured or the challenges they had overcome that defined them. It was the consistent choice they had made every day to love each other well, to see each other's needs and meet them, to build a partnership based on mutual respect and care, to create a home where everyone knew they were valued, starting with making sure the one who gave the most was given to in return. That was the legacy of Miles and Delilah Tucker. That was the story that endured long after they were gone. That was the love that changed not just their lives, but the lives of everyone who came after them, spreading out like ripples in a pond, touching shores they would never see but shaping the landscape nonetheless. And somewhere in whatever comes after this life, two souls rested together, still holding hands, still choosing each other, still demonstrating that true love is not found but built, brick by brick, meal by meal, day by day, from the simple but profound choice to care for another person with all your heart. The prairie wind still blew across Nebraska, carrying with it the whispers of their story, ensuring that as long as the grass grew and the sky stretched endlessly overhead, people would remember. They would remember the cowboy and his lady. They would remember that he noticed she ate last. And they would remember that he made sure, from that moment forward, her plate was always served first.